The Appalachian Cultural Music Association is an all-volunteer nonprofit organization preserving and promoting the history of bluegrass, old-time, and country music. The ACMA maintains the Mountain Music Museum and Gift Shop at 626 State Street in downtown Bristol, Tennessee, Virginia, and also presents the weekly Monday night Pickin' Porch concerts at the Foundation Event Facility located next door to the Mountain Music Museum. Concerts begin at 7 p.m. every Monday evening. For information, visit mountainmusicmuseum.org. That's mountainmusicmuseum.org. In the heart of downtown Bristol, visit ACMA's Mountain Music Museum and Gift Shop. Admission is free.
Ralph Peer wanted to make some recordings in Appalachia, and so he talked with his friend Ernest Stoneman, and Ernest Stoneman was an established star in hillbilly music by 1927. He had made many records that had sold extremely well, and so basically Ernest Stoneman, when talking with Ralph Peer, recommended that Ralph Peer come to Bristol for really the first Ralph Peer-led recording session in the mountains. You see, before 1927, most of the Southern mountain musicians had to travel away from the mountains to make the records. They would travel to New York or Atlanta or some of these other big cities in order to make records.
Ralph Peer, when he recorded the Bristol Sessions in 1927, July and August, he came to town with his equipment in the trunk of his car. And he had to have a place to set it up. Well, he looked around town, and I don't know how it came about, but he ended up on the second floor of a hat company warehouse. And he went up and set up what they called a makeshift studio. They had to put, from what I understand, draped quilts, put up a clothesline and drape quilts around to get the acoustics like they wanted it, and people would come and climb up the steps to the second floor and record their music for Ralph Peer.
They were an effort by the Victor Talking Machine Company to try to capitalize on the, shall we say, the wealth of musicians that lived in and around Bristol, Tennessee, Virginia.
It was pretty much crude by the standards that we have today. I talked to Howard Greer, who recorded at those sessions shortly before his death back in the 1990s, and he said that he was with the Bull Mountain Moonshiners. That was Jesse McReynolds' grandfather's band. And he said that they started recording their record, and Ralph Peer stopped them and said, all right, the banjo pickers gotta back up, you're too loud to the microphone. And they put actually put a pillow under Howard Greer's foot because he was, patting his foot, stomping his foot as he played, and they didn't want that in the record. So they just had to do things on the fly and set that studio up just to where it would work the best that it could.
Johnny Cash called the Bristol Sessions the single most important event in country music history. And he was right. Country music did exist before the Bristol Sessions. Recorded country music did. It goes back to at least to 1922. Eck Robertson recorded in 1922. Vernon Dalhart had a million seller with the wreck of the old 97.
He also brought in publishing companies. He's kind of blazed the trail for publishing in music. That's where an artist would get paid for writing their music. Before that, it was relatively, it wasn't happening. So that gave an artist or a songwriter artist the opportunity to make a few cents on his songwriting abilities.
What really set these particular sessions in stone as the single most important event in country music history is the very fact that a major record company was behind it, for one thing, with Victor and Ralph Peer, but also in that the coming together of massive talent in the form of the Carter family, and Jimmy Rogers, and as well with Pop Stoneman, it launched.
My granddad, AP, had seen an advertisement in the paper that the Victor Talking Machine Company was going to be auditioning artists for their recording contracts. And he decided that he wanted to go to Bristol. They had been making music at church events, at socials and get-togethers, and mostly in church, but they had not really done anything more than that. My granddad had been approached by Brunswick Records, but they wanted him to fiddle. They wanted him to be called Fiddlin' Doc, and his mother was adamantly opposed to that. She thought the fiddle was the devil's instrument. My granddad adored his mother and always listened to her advice. She wanted his music to stand for something, to be about Christian values, family, and he felt that way too. His Christian faith was very important to him. But he decided that they would go to Bristol to audition for Victor. Maybelle was 8 months pregnant, so it could not have been an easy journey for her. They did borrow Maybelle's brother, Ezra, Maybelle's husband, my granddad's brother, Ezra, Maybelle's husband. They borrowed his car, an Essex, to take them to Bristol. I know they had 3 flat tires on the way to Bristol that they had to get out and patch with the old rubber patches. They forded the river to get to Bristol, and they basically followed an old wagon trail. There was not a real road to Bristol.
The trip from Macy Springs, probably, I'm guessing about 15, 20 miles away as the crow flies, was it was an all-day trip back in 1927, but they came over, from what I understand, on July 31st, spent the night, and recorded the next day.
Jimmy Rogers recorded 2 songs. That's it, 2 songs in July of 1927. His 2 songs were released on October 7th, 1927, and didn't sell that well. However, the Carter families did. They recorded 6 songs, the most prominent of which was Bury Me Under the Weeping Willow, which to this day is one of the all-time great country songs ever recorded.
They spent the night with my Virgie. Virgie was a twin to Ezra, Maybelle's husband. They spent the night with her, and I think they recorded over 2 days. And I know they recorded 6 songs initially, which was more than any other artist that auditioned at that time. And the first one was Bury Me Beneath the Weeping Willow. And I know they did Single Girl, Married Girl, which my grandmother did not like. She never liked the song. She did it very well, and it ended up being the best-selling one of the 6, but it was not her favorite. When he heard my grandmother sing, he was convinced that he needed to put them under contract. Her voice was the deciding factor, and if you hear it, it's so distinctive and so clear that you can see why he was captivated by it.
Mother Maybelle was revolutionized the guitar with her style of picking, the Carter scratch. Actually, her picking made the guitar a lead instrument. Before that, it was pretty much a rhythm instrument. And she was influenced quite a bit by a black gentleman from over around Kingsport, Tennessee, Leslie Riddle. If you want to learn more about Leslie Riddle, Google his name on the internet. You'll be fascinated on what an impact he had on the music of not only Mother Maybelle's guitar picking, but he would travel around with A.P. Carter. Jimmy Rogers was quite a character. He heard about the Bristol Sessions of 1927 while he was performing over in Asheville, North Carolina, and about starving to death. And he was over there with the Grant brothers. And the Grant brothers and Jimmy Rogers, like I said, were in a band together. They decided to come over to Bristol and record for Ralph Peer and Victor. On the way over here, I'll make a long story short, they got in an argument on how they were going to build the band. Jimmy was quite a showman, quite a promoter, a little cocky, but I love what I've read about Jimmy Rogers. He really made things happen. Even though he was starving, he never gave up, and he was suffering from tuberculosis, which in 1930 I think 1933, ended up taking his life. He died from tuberculosis.
Jimmie Rodgers, who is known as the father of country music, of course, influenced hugely so many artists from so many different styles of music, rock and roll music and pop music and folk music and blues. You can make a case for Jimmie Rodgers first popularizing blues in the early 1930s for people like Bessie Smith and others.
He was quite a songwriter, he was quite a singer, and he revolutionized country music with his style. He was known as the Blue Yodeler because he did do a lot of yodeling in his songs.
If you took Jimmie Rodgers out of the mix, if you went back to Miami, Florida, where he was working as a brakeman and ran over him, if a train had run over him or something, or some mishap, a boxcar fell on him or something. If you took Jimmie Rodgers out of the mix, there'd be no Gene Autry, there'd be no Hank Williams, there'd be no Lefty Frizzell, there'd be no Ernest Tubb, there'd be no Elvis, there'd be no Johnny Cash, there'd be no Merle Haggard, there'd be no Marty Robbins, and if there were no Elvis, there'd be no Beatles. You could make a case for Jimmie Rodgers as the lone ranger of American music, who, if you took him out of the mix, if you just removed him for whatever reason, the world would, spin out of its orbit musically. There's no way of knowing where we'd be now, where we'd be for the last, 80 years, 70, 80 years, because he influenced completely American styles of music. What we know now as roots music, be it blues, and rock and roll, and country music, and bluegrass music. He was the guy.
Remember, every Monday night from 7 to 9 at 620 State Street in Bristol, Tennessee, at the Foundation Event Facility. Admission is free. We do ask for donations. Listen to this.
Flatt and Scruggs, Roy Acuff, the Carter family, Jimmie Rodgers, the Stoneman family, the Stanley Brothers. See the history of these country and bluegrass artists and much more at the ACMA's Mountain Music Museum in the heart of downtown Bristol on the Tennessee side of State Street, country music's birthplace. Experience it at the ACMA's Mountain Music Museum. For information, visit our website at mountainmusicmuseum.org. That's mountainmusicmuseum.org in the heart of downtown Bristol. Visit the ACMA's Mountain Music Museum and Gift Shop. Admission is free.